Hello everyone, this is Mr. Seymour, and this is Chapter 8, Elections. We're actually in Week 9. I skipped over this chapter in order to do the special interests last week, but this week we're going to go on ahead and pick up on Chapter 8, and then we're going to go into our institutions next week. Should the government require all Americans to have health insurance? While individual Americans disagreed about this question, the states and the federal government also disagreed about the states' role in implementing the Affordable Care Act. Americans vote in all sorts of places, including libraries, fire stations, schools, private homes, and sometimes churches, as shown in this photo of a polling station in the 2016 South Carolina primary. Voting is costly in terms of time and effort. After registering and informing themselves about the election, voters have to take the time to go to the polls and possibly wait in line. Now, these are the constitutional requirements to be a candidate for three different offices: president, senator, and representative. To run for president, you must be 35 years of age, a natural-born citizen, which means you must be born in the United States or on U.S. territory, or the child of a citizen parent. And Barack Obama was criticized because he was born allegedly in Kenya, even though they did discover that he was born in Hawaii. And then they said, well, he was born in Hawaii before it was a state. And it really didn't matter because his mother was a United States citizen from Iowa. Senator, you must be 30 years old, a resident of the state that you are going to represent, and a U.S. citizen for at least 9 years. And to become a representative, you must be 25 years old, a resident of the state you're going to live in, or you're going to represent, and the U.S. citizen for at least 7 years. In the American political system, Americans do not make their own policy choices most of the time. Rather, they vote on the individuals to make decisions on their behalf. The result of the electoral decisions have far-reaching implications for what government does in the coming years. Elections are also the mechanism for citizens to reward or punish their elected officials for good or poor job performance. So, in deciding on a candidate, there are different functions that elections serve. First is selecting representatives. Who's going to hold office? Second is influencing policy. What should the government do? And the third is promoting accountability. Has my incumbent done a good job? Retrospective evaluation is defined as a voter's judgment of an office holder's job performance since the last election. I like to call it the "what have you done for me lately" question, because retrospective evaluation basically involves looking back at a candidate and saying, what has that candidate done for me? Candidates may gain media attention and name recognition by hosting campaign events alongside well-known surrogates. Here, Senator and former presidential candidate John McCain, a Republican of Arizona, speaks at an event supporting incumbent Senator Pat Toomey, a Republican of Pennsylvania. Aspiring members of Congress must achieve two different goals. Before running for the actual seat itself, they must typically first receive the party's nomination, which is won through the primary election. There are many advantages for running as a partisan, but the most important is the ability to get a guaranteed spot on the ballot. Independents are not guaranteed ballot access, and as such, typically have to gather signatures on a petition or for a spot on the ballot. A primary election decides which candidates get the party's nomination. There are three different kinds, as we've talked about before when we looked at political parties. There's the open primary, the semi-closed primary, and the closed primary. In Texas, we have open primaries. The general election decides which of the nominees gets to hold office. In the House of Representatives, an elected official gets to hold a 2-year term. The president holds a 4-year term, and the senator holds a 6-year term. Congressional districts are single-member districts. Districts are geographically determined. Single-member districts mean that a representative represents a specific territory or district within the state. Districts are geographically determined. Senators represent entire states, while House candidates compete within congressional districts that are portions of the state, and they represent about 700 to 750,000 voters each. The winning requirements. For a plurality vote, it means you get the most votes. That's a plurality vote. For a majority vote, you must get 50% of the votes plus 1. Runoff elections happen if no finisher gets a 50% plus 1 vote. And in a runoff election, the top 2 finishers go in a head-to-head race so that you have a majority vote. Presidential campaign appearances almost always involve extensive print and electronic media coverage, reporting on virtually everything that candidates say or do. In primaries and caucuses, the winning convention delegates are proportionally allocated, or they win on a winner-take-all basis. And then you have your superdelegates. Most states have winner-take-all, and all states have superdelegates. Front-loading is when you try to have your election up front. And the best example of that is the Super Tuesday voting elections. The National Convention is where the delegates go, and the nominee is formally selected and becomes a candidate, and the party platform is officially selected. Presidential campaigns focus their attention on states with high electoral votes and swing states, those where the candidate has a good chance of winning. In this box, we group states in categories based on the number of electoral votes and on whether one party always won the state in recent presidential elections. Okay, so in a swing, let's see, number of electoral votes, 3 to 5 electoral votes have D.C., Delaware, Alaska, Montana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Vermont, Wyoming, Hawaii, Maine, Rhode Island, Idaho, Nebraska, and West Virginia. These are not swing states. These are very small states. Those that are swing states are New Hampshire and New Mexico. Those states that have 6 to 10 electoral votes are Arkansas, Kansas, Utah, Connecticut, Oregon, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, and Minnesota. Your swing states are Iowa, Nevada, Colorado, and Wisconsin. And with more than 10 electoral votes, Massachusetts, Arizona, Tennessee, Washington, New Jersey, Georgia, Illinois, North Carolina, Texas, and California are not considered swing states. So we are not in a swing state. Texas tends to go red. California tends to go blue, as an example. Arizona tends to go red. Tennessee, red. Washington, blue. New Jersey, blue. Georgia, red. Illinois, blue. Massachusetts, blue. All right. And swing states are Indiana, Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Political scientists argue that the Electoral College system tends to magnify the winning candidate's margin of victory. Look at the data presented here and ask yourself, does it support this view? Look at the elections of 2000 and 2016 for specific evidence of how the Electoral College can impact the outcome of a close election. And in both of those cases, the winning candidate won the Electoral College but lost the popular vote. Political scientists argue that the fundamentals play a key role in American elections. For example, the state of the economy is thought to influence vote decisions in presidential elections. A strong economy benefits incumbent presidents or their successors. However, most candidates and journalists argue that the thing candidates say and do during the campaign determines who wins and who loses. What do the numbers say? To answer this question, examine the figure below, which shows the relationship between presidential election outcomes, a vote for the incumbent president or the candidate of the party, and economic conditions. The growth in real personal income in the year before the election. There are many factors that influence election, and many of those factors are out of the candidate's control. Two factors have important implications for the electoral outcome, and one is economic conditions and the other is party identification. And if you look at the signs, especially since 1980, you'll see that party has become more important than economic growth lately, because we're becoming more partisan. All right. Open seats are those seats that are not going to be occupied by an incumbent, so they're open to anyone who wants to run for that seat. Before the campaign, there are some things that candidates try to do. They try to keep constituents happy, they try to raise money for their campaign, and they try to build and maintain campaign organizations. During the campaign, it's name recognition and voter mobilization that matter the most. GoTV stands for Get Out the Vote. Aspiring political candidates and parties begin preparing for the next election as soon as possible. They don't focus on all the seats, but rather on the ones that have the best chance of winning, thus targeting vulnerable incumbents or open seats. The reason parties and aspiring politicians focus on open seats in particular is that incumbents are typically very good at what it takes to win elections. Their casework in Washington, D.C. helps build constituents, and they have already built a successful campaign organization. This makes incumbents difficult to defeat. They're already good at what they do. During the campaign, the two biggest features are building name recognition and mobilizing supporters. Campaigns may try to win supporters over, but they will typically devote more resources to getting existing supporters to the polls. And this has to do with impacting retrospective voting and eliciting positive retrospective voter recognition. During campaigns, candidates often seek to strengthen the perception that they share or are at least sympathetic to average Americans' belief and interests. Hillary Clinton here meets with voters over coffee and pastries at a campaign stop in Stone Ridge, Virginia. American presidential campaigns depend on thousands of paid and volunteer staff. Here, volunteers for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton make phone calls to potential supporters from a Clinton campaign office in Newark, Ohio. In 2016, the presidential race many of the ads aired by the Trump campaign and Republican groups criticized Hillary Clinton, focusing on what they deemed to be her corrupt political associations. Platforms are the party's attempts to specify what its members wish to achieve in office. A lot of negotiation goes into the party platform. Different groups within the party lobby for their particular issue to be addressed. Platforms are difficult to write because they must appeal to extreme base supporters, they must attract undecided supporters who typically hold less extreme positions. The BCRA of 2002 put into effect limits on how much individual organizations and corporations could contribute to candidates' campaigns. The limits were changed based on Supreme Court decisions in 2010 and 2014. At present, although there are still limits on contributions that individuals and political action committees can make to each individual candidate, there are no limits on total overall contributions to multiple candidates by individuals and political action committees. And we've talked about no limit spending. Individuals can contribute $2,700 to a candidate, $33,400 to national committees, $10,000 in combined contributions to state, district, and local parties, $5,000 to a PAC, but no limit on the number of contributions they make, so they can support more than one candidate. Political action committees are limited to $5,000 for individual candidates, $15,000 for the national party committees, $5,000 combined limit on state, district, and local party contributions, $5,000 to political action committees, and no limit on the total number of contributions they make across the board. National party committees are limited to $5,000 to individual candidates. National party committees may contribute as much as they want to themselves. There's no limit on state, district, and local parties. A $5,000 limit on, $5,000 limit on PACs, and a $45,400 limit to Senate candidates per campaign. And then your state, district, and local party committees can contribute $5,000 combined limit, no limit on national party committee contributions, no limit on state, district, and local party contributions, $5,000 limit on political action committee contributions, and no limit on total contributions. So for the most part, there's no limit on total contributions. The Federal Election Commission is in charge of administering election laws. It is a bipartisan campaign Finance Reform Act, the BCRA, also known as the McCain-Feingold Act, outlawed soft money and created a stand by your ad disclaimer requirement. In other words, that's where they have to say, "Hi, my name is Donald Trump, and I support this ad." Hard money is money that helps elect or defeat specific candidates. Soft money is money that is used for mobilization and party building. The Citizens United versus FEC case changed campaign finance rules by removing all restrictions on independent efforts funded by corporations and unions. The collective action problem is closely tied to the free rider problem, as we've discovered before. The incentive to benefit from others' work without making a contribution is the free rider problem. This leads individuals in a collective action situation to refuse to work together. A lighthouse is a classic example of a public good, a service or product that could not be produced by private markets because once the good is provided, anyone can benefit from it without paying. Another good example is a federal highway. Supplying public goods is one way that government promotes the public welfare. Some other notable examples of collective action problems are education and climate change. Does money equal speech, or should campaign contributions be limited? That is the question that comes across as we discuss the Citizens United case and its impact. Candidates and political parties raised and spend a great deal of money in their campaigns. But do these numbers help to explain the high re-election rates for members of Congress? Presidential spending includes federal matching funds for the general election. If you look at how much money was raised in 2014 and then look at how much money was raised in 2016, it went up by almost $3 to $4 billion. Fundraising continuously goes up, especially the need for media. This figure shows how turnout or registered voter varies both over time and between presidential and midterm elections. Why don't more people vote in midterm election years? And why don't more people vote in any given year? That becomes the question. Midterm election years are for Senate and Congressional, not for presidential. So people tend to vote for president, but they don't vote as much when it comes to anything that isn't presidential. Of course, these heuristics are not foolproof. A pro-choice Republican would be disappointed by George W. Bush's strong opposition to abortion. As voter information increases, the likelihood of choosing the right queue increases. Voters can vote straight or split-ticket ballots. Some scholars believe that voters like to balance government by voting for one party's presidential candidate and another party's candidates for Congress. Some people are what we call issue voters. Most people use voting queues. One's partisanship is a voting queue. The single best predictor of one's vote is his partisanship, the party membership. Incumbency, you're more apt to vote for an incumbent. Receiving help from a lawmaker, if you received help from a lawmaker, you're more likely to vote for that lawmaker. And by receiving help, I'm not talking about money here. I'm talking about going and asking that lawmaker to help you with a problem. Candidates' personal traits, things like gender, race, age, and religious beliefs. And retrospective evaluations or retrospective voting. Cues work in concert with political information in helping someone decide how to vote. In most elections, voters tend to focus on local issues and consider their votes for congressional and presidential candidates separately. This leads to lots of split-ticket voting, in which voters support candidates from different parties. In wave elections, voters typically voice frustration with the state of the economy or war or a political scandal. Even those incumbents suffer more losses in wave elections than otherwise, they still tend to get re-elected in larger numbers. So normal elections have high re-election rates of incumbents, independent evaluations of presidential and congressional candidates. Nationalized or wave elections have many voters voting against incumbents and focus typically on one issue. Many could argue that the last election was a wave election. Certainly the 2008 election was a wave election. Now this is 2016 presidential election results by state. What I want you to notice is where are the majority of the red states? Right here in the center of the country, with few exceptions. The blue states are those that voted Democrat. The red states are those that voted Republican. So your blue states tend to be to the left on the West Coast and to the right on the East Coast, particularly Northeast Coast. In 2012, President Obama won re-election. And the reason was because better organization helped President Obama defeat Republican challenger Mitt Romney. In 2014, though, Republicans took over the Senate, and the national conditions strongly favored Republican sentiments. In 2016, Donald Trump wins Republican nomination and prevails over a crowded field of 17 candidates. Hillary Clinton won the Democratic nomination, facing strong competition from left-wing candidate Bernie Sanders. And of course, we know that Trump won. Trump won with a strong rural turnout, which he trailed in polls for most of the campaign, but made specific gains among white voters. He lost the popular vote, but he prevailed in the Electoral College. Clinton won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College and eventually lost the election. The drop-off in support among Democrats who had voted for Obama and decided they'd vote for something new, so they voted for Trump. Now the Republicans control executive and legislative branches, so the unified Republican government could reduce gridlock, advance conservative ideas, and similar policy constraints that faced Obama will face Trump. But right now, Trump isn't able to get hardly any of his agenda passed. And so he's making a lot of executive decisions and issuing a lot of executive orders. This figure shows variation in group support for Democrats and Republicans in the 2014 elections. How did the positions and issues emphasized by candidates in the two parties create or strengthen these differences? So, for instance, The majority of people that voted Republican were male. They were aged 55 and over. They were white. They had incomes of between $30,000 and about $100,000. And those that voted Democrat tended to be more female, aged 18 to 29. They were more black and Hispanic and Asian than white, and had incomes of less than $100,000. So let's see how things work in theory. The Electoral College. Each state has a number of electoral votes. The number of electors from each state equals the state's number of House members, which varies based on the state's population, plus the number of senators, which is always 2 per state. And each elector has 1 vote in the Electoral College. Who are these electors? Candidates to be electors are nominated by their political parties. They pledge to support a certain candidate if they are elected to the Electoral College. When you cast your vote for a presidential candidate in a presidential election, you are in fact voting for the state of potential electors who support that candidate. Usually it's a winner-take-all situation. To win a state, most states give all of their Electoral College votes to the candidate who wins the most votes in that state. So even if a candidate only gets 51% of the vote of the state, his or her entire slate of electors is elected, and he or she gets all the state's votes in the Electoral College. So even though in California, Democrats won 60% of the popular vote and Republicans won 40%, because they won the popular vote in that state, all of the electorals went to the Democrats, 100%. Donald Trump's victory in 2016 presidential campaign was a shock to many, even to his own supporters. But how did he win? He won through the Electoral College. He was able to court solid Republican states and 4 core states. Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And that gave him the election. He targeted the Rust Belt, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These states have relatively weak economies and few minority voters. So he knew what he was running for. Growing minority populations in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Colorado were held off. Though Democrats hope to win all of these states because of their high minority populations, only Nevada and Colorado have been swing states in recent elections, and many people felt that Georgia and Arizona have been trending towards the Democrats. Ultimately, Trump used a combination of these strategies to win 306 electoral votes and the presidency. Trump's final winning college map is shown here with 306 electoral votes. He won Georgia, he won Arizona, he won Michigan, he won Pennsylvania, he won Wisconsin. Then he won Ohio, North Carolina, Iowa, and Florida, which were swing states. And because of this, he was able to get enough states to win the the electoral vote, even though he lost the popular vote. Though Hillary Clinton fell short in her effort to become America's first female president, she was able to win over 61 million voters, more than any candidate besides Barack Obama. This figure shows that despite public dissatisfaction with Congress, incumbents still tend to be re-elected in their respective districts. According to the chart, which congressional elections were wave elections and which were normal elections. Though incumbents fared very well in 2016's congressional elections, some still lost, like Nevada Republican Crescent Hardy. Each term, members of Congress decide whether or not to retire or run for another term. Representative Dan Benishek of Republican of Michigan announced his decision not to seek re-election in 2016. In late 2015, he left his seat in the House open. Retirement decisions which create open seat races are an opportunity for one party to gain seats over another. Elections matter, especially when determining who controls the congressional agenda. Republican gains in the Senate in 2014 led to Mitch McConnell, a Republican of Kentucky, taking over as Senate Majority Leader. Most office holders are always campaigning, traveling around their states or districts, talking with constituents and explaining their actions in office, all in hope of winning and keeping support for the next election. Here, Representative Beto O'Rourke, our representative, a Democrat of Texas, meets with constituents on the Paso del Norte Bridge, which crosses into the United States from Mexico.